you can picture the guy sitting there in the dark, just chain smoking throughout the show, and asking these questions and really feeling like it was, you know, a very outside pirate thing that you shouldn't be listening to.
Yeah, and that was the crazy thing, is that it kept that feel for so long, that pirate radio feeling. And yeah, you're right. When he would do that laugh, when something genuinely hit him,
right,
and you would almost hear the smoke in the voice.
Right. He barely would pot the mic down in time to go into the coughing fit that inevitably would follow. But
Right.
But yeah, you just felt, and that's how he did the show, and he made no bones about it. He would say, you know, I turn all the lights off. He would have a little like lamp, desk lamp or whatever, so he could read whatever copy he had to read or whatever notes that he had. And that's how he would do the show. You know, he would do the show the same way people were sitting in their bedrooms with the covers pulled up listening to the show. And it gave it a sense of genuineness, and it gave it a sense of, you know, it was not some slickly produced production. And it certainly didn't feel like it was the #1 radio show in the world.
Now, whether it's like talking with him during the Dark Matters days, or just whether you've heard anything, like what did he think of paranormal radio today? Do we know that? Did he know how he thought? We obviously know how he felt about where Coast to Coast had gone, but how did he feel about, you know, like the blog talks and the things like that? Like, had he ever spoken out about that?
From what I could gather, I don't think that he paid any attention to it. You know, he was a radio guy, a terrestrial radio guy, and that's, you know, where he saw himself, and that's where he paid attention. I don't think he worried so much about this other stuff. And if you told him, you know, he was the inspiration for it, I'm sure he would say, hey, that's nice. But I don't think that he really considered that the future until the time came when they decided to launch Dark Matter as a digital version, when the satellite deal kind of fell through. And it's hard because I don't want to be critical, but I have a lot of questions about the way things went down. I have a lot of questions about the decision to come back on Sirius XM and how quickly that fell apart. And I have questions in the pit of my stomach about the whole Dark Matter thing and coming back and all that. And I don't want to disparage him, because it's great being part of the Dark Matter Radio Network. It's an honor that Art Bell felt like this show was worthy enough of being associated with his name. But I feel like, and I don't think I'm really insulting him by saying this or insulting anybody else. I just feel like his heart wasn't in it as much because it wasn't cracking a mic on terrestrial radio and hoping that the airwaves carried out around the country. It's different when you know that anybody in the country can, or anybody around the world can turn you on at any given moment with the internet or with satellite radio or what have you. But it loses some of the luster and some of the fun of just wondering who is going to find you by accident. You know, who is going to just turn their antenna the wrong way one night trying to pick up another station and get you instead. I think a lot of that magic was gone for him, and I think that that's kind of why he didn't have the same vigor to do the shows in later years that he might have had before. That's just my speculation.
Yeah, and you know, the more that I think about, you know, that question, it almost seems much more like he was a radio host than he was necessarily tied down to caring about the progress of the field, you know, and like what was going on in the paranormal field, because he would have no problem bringing in guests that had nothing to do with the paranormal and sitting down with Crystal Gale for 2 hours.
Right. He was somebody who he was a master interviewer. Like, it doesn't matter who you put in front of him. And that's why he had callers on for so long, because he would turn the call into an interview. He could get a story out of somebody that never thought that they had a story to tell.
Yeah, and you know, the funny thing is that you as a listener would tell in the first 10 seconds that this guy was a crack.
Mm-hmm.
And very rarely within the first 5 minutes was a caller considered that, unless they said something really offensive. And so all of a sudden it was by putting the weight of, like, this is a genuine call and someone telling me a genuine story onto those callers, like, he got to the heart of the story. And maybe you didn't agree with it, maybe you didn't believe what the person was saying, but you were hearing a story, and at the end of it you could at least say, like, all right, well, now I can really think about that, as opposed to, like, you know, the old Jerry Williams shut up and hang up on him.
Well,
Can I make a Jerry Williams
yes.
reference, or are people who aren't from Massachusetts going to get that?
No, I think everybody has a Jerry Williams somewhere.
Okay.
But that's the other thing too, is like that's one of the ways that he kind of shaped me as a host was, listening and trying to hear where it's not so much about. I'm trying not to give away too much because I really don't want to get myself in trouble here, but it's not like George, where when you're going to be a guest with George, you have to submit a list of questions,
Right.
and George doesn't deviate from that list. There, I said it. I'm probably going to get in trouble now, but when you give
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's a known thing, and
I know, but
as a
it's
matter of
not.
fact,
It's one thing if a guest says it. It's another thing if another host is attacking him for it. But that's just the nature of the position. You're interviewing 20 people a week. That's what you have to do. But
right.
it never felt that way with Art. Art was listening to everything that you were saying, and he was crafting the next question in a way where the conversation would continue and maybe go down a different way than was originally planned. But he was taking what you had to offer, finding the substance, and finding where the audience should want to have that logically go next.
And I think I'm not sure if that's an unreasonable thing in the biz when you're doing a daily show, because you and I both know that we've had people who in the past have submitted lists of questions that they want us to ask, or, here are things that people commonly ask, and they give you a list of things to ask. And I always tell the people, like, oh, no, like, Tim doesn't work that way. Is that okay? Like, he's not going to play that way because, he likes the flow. He likes it. So you can tell that, like, that's partly inspired by Art, and we've actually once or twice not had a guest on because we wouldn't agree to go over this list of questions. So yeah. I don't know whether you can say that the current incarnation of Coast to Coast kind of created that model, and people are comfortable with it. Some people are very comfortable with it, or whether they're just kind of like doing what the industry standard is. But yeah, I think that you can tell Spooky South Coast is not modeled after that kind of thing, but rather that flow in that conversation, because that guest is going to appear on many, many radio shows, right? They're going to do the whole stream of them. They're going to appear on as many as they can,
right.
Terrestrial ones, podcast ones, and they're going to say the same thing all the time if they're responding to those questions. But the way that Art had of bringing up something that you would never even think to ask them if you were an interviewer was part of what made that show so amazing.
And I do think that the Coast to Coast model shapes a lot of what the current Coast to Coast model is shaping a lot of what goes on in radio talk of this genre, because people listen to that show and they dream of being on that show and hosting that show, and so they model themselves in that fashion. And I think that has influenced other shows, because even if there's people that don't listen to Coast, they listen to these other shows that are influenced by it. And I never wanted to be that. I wanted to be turn off the lights and sit in the dark and talk. That's what I find is the interesting part about this, is that you're talking about stuff that wouldn't be on polished radio, so there's no reason to make it polished radio. And right. I feel like that makes it, the more real and laid back you can make the show feel, the more accepting people might be of the topics that are being brought up on it. And I think that's what Art's approach was. I want to be as relatable as I can so that the audience feels like, I never felt like I was talked down to listening to an Art Bell show. I never felt like I was being lectured to. I always felt like Art went into it assuming that me, the listener, had the same level of knowledge that he had on a topic, and he didn't waste a lot of time, maybe a minute or two at the beginning of an interview, but he didn't waste a lot of time rehashing concepts. You had to keep up with Art Bell, and you had to listen to every show to be able to always know what they were talking about, but yet you could also just tune in for the first time and become completely enraptured. It was just magic, and it's something that I don't think can happen anymore in radio.